We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. Thank you for being here on what is, I think, the nicest night of this spring. So lovely to have you. I'll be right back. All right. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Misha Stone, she, her, and I'm a librarian at the Seattle Public Library's Reader Services Department. Thank you so much. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that the Seattle Public Library is on Indigenous land. These are the traditional, unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish people. Thank you for joining us for our kickoff event for Clarion West's summer reading series. It's so nice to have you here and to be in community with you. We missed when we weren't able to gather together in person, so this is really lovely. The work that Clarion West Writers Workshop does in our local and global community to foster emerging writers in speculative fiction is just phenomenal. We are honored to have Susan Palwick here tonight as the week 1 instructor. Welcome, Susan, and welcome, students. For those of you who are joining us online tonight, we do have CART captioning, and if you need information as to how to access that, we will add that into the YouTube chat. This event is supported by the Seattle Public Library Foundation, author series Gary Kunis, and media sponsor the Seattle Times, presented in partnership with our lovely partners, University Bookstore. And I wanted to mention that the library has started hosting in-person author events at the Central Library that are also hybrid. So there is also the possibility of, again, attending online. We ask that you register. Thank you so much. And we hope to see you at our upcoming events. Very briefly, I want to mention that University Bookstore has an event tomorrow night at 6 o'clock with Sam J. Miller for the releases of his new short story collection, Boys, Beasts, and Men. And he'll be in conversation with Ted Chiang. We have the Bullet Lecture tomorrow night in American History with Judy Heumann and Jay Kim, and that's at 7 o'clock. And then a couple of other events that you may be interested in coming up is Otessa Mosfeig will be in conversation with Kim Fu on Monday, June 27th at 7 o'clock. Clarion West joins us again the following week with P. Jelly Clark, who just won the Nebula Award. Congratulations to him on Tuesday, June 28th at 7 o'clock. Clarion West will also be here again with Fonda Lee on Tuesday, July 5th at 7 o'clock. And then we are bringing the 6-week instructors, Annalee Newitz and Charlie Jane Anders here as well, Tuesday, July 26th at 7 o'clock. So thank you so much for joining us here. And I want to hand it over now to Yang Yang from the Clarion West board. Take it away, Yang Yang.
Testing, testing. Thank you, Misha. Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining us for the 2022 Clarion West Summer Reading Series. My name is Yang Yang Wang, he, him, and I have not done this, spoken to a live audience in a really long time. So sorry if I just stare at my cell phone. I'm a member of the Clarion West board, and this is the first time since 2019 that we've held our reading series and our summer workshop in person. Woohoo! Thank you all for joining us both online and in person. Thank you to the Seattle Public Library and the University Bookstore for partnering on tonight's event. This series and our other classes and workshops would not be possible without the generous support of the Seattle Office of Arts and Cultural Affairs, King County for Culture, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the generosity of donors like you. Clarion West's mission is to support emerging and underrepresented voices by providing writers with world-class instruction to empower their creation of wild and amazing worlds. Through conversation and public engagement, we bring those voices to an ever-expanding community. Tonight, we're proud to showcase the work of one of our amazing instructors, Susan Palwick, who you'll learn more about in a moment from Jay. After tonight, the reading series continues through July 26. All of the readings are on Tuesdays and can be registered for online at clarionwest.org. Please note that the readings on July 12th and 19th will be held at the Seattle Town Hall at 7:30 p.m. But due to construction around that neighborhood, please plan in advance for parking. In addition to our reading series and our summer workshop, the Clarion West Write-a-thon is officially underway. The Write-a-thon has turned into an international community event, and it's our longest running fundraiser. Think of it like a walkathon, but with words. Writers from all over the world sign up and set writing goals and then recruit sponsors to show their support by making a donation to Clarion West. That sponsorship is really important, not just to Clarion West, but to the individual writers. During the write-a-thon, writers stretch and accomplish so much. Hundreds of thousands of words of new work that might not otherwise exist are created. We have 482 writers participating in the write-a-thon so far this year. I encourage all of you, and you out there, to consider sponsoring one or more of those writers by visiting the Clarion West website. So after this event, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. We'll pass out index cards and pencils for the in-person questions, and we will be reading questions from the YouTube chat as well. Thank you again for your support. Now, I'm going to invite Clarion West Workshop Coordinator, Jay Steinbacher, to tell you more about Susan Palwick. Please welcome Jay Steinbacher.
Thank you, Yang Yang. And as he mentioned, I'm the residential workshop coordinator. We now have residential and online programs, so I wanted to make that distinction. So turning my attention to Susan Palwick. Susan Palwick is a multiple award-winning author, a Clarion West alumna from the class of 1985, and now a two-time Clarion West instructor, a hospice chaplain in Reno, a weaver, and a cat lover. Through all of this shines her empathetic and resilient personality. Susan received a Crawford Award for her first novel, an Alex Award from the American Library Association, and a Silver Pen Award from the Nevada Writers Hall of Fame. Her work has also been shortlisted for the World Fantasy Award, the Mythopoeic Award, and the Philip K. Dick Award. She writes often about community, faith, loss, and characters seeking a sense of belonging. Her work has been called wise, heartfelt, beautifully limbed, not limbed, armed, but limbed, and full of grace. In a Clark's World interview about her second collection, All Worlds Are Real, Susan said, "I strongly believe that fiction's a technology for creating imaginative empathy. My job as a writer is to try to see the world from as many different viewpoints as possible." It's not difficult to come away from her words or a day in the classroom with a sense of the connections she makes in her day's work with hospice patients, or the way she crafts brilliantly colored patterns from threads on her loom. I hope all of you sharing this space with her tonight, whether you're here in person or joining us online, will feel woven together in vibrant community. Please join me in welcoming Susan Palwick.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to take this off. Am I speaking into the mic correctly? I tend to be a little allergic to technology. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for being here. YouTube people, thank you for being there. I think my husband's here, so hi, honey. So the story I'm going to read tonight is called Sparrows. It's forthcoming in Asimov's. It's one of the most depressing things I've ever written, which, if you know my work, is a pretty high bar. So for anyone who makes it through the reading, I have brought chocolate because, you know, we all need treats when we're facing the apocalypse. So Sheila Williams at Asimov's bought this story and sent me a note and said, well, I love it, but I'm going to have to sandwich it between cheerier materials. So, okay. So this is called Sparrows. I think I haven't actually timed it. I think it'll take about 20 minutes to read. Lacey had been alone in the dorm for 3 weeks when she finished her Shakespeare paper. All the electronics had been down even before the evacuation, but she'd anticipated that. She'd printed out a copy of the draft while she still could. After everyone else had left, she raided Robert's room. He collected manual typewriters, and he'd had to leave them behind. One backpack, they'd been told, but Lacey had seen bright things that looked like backpacks bobbing in the water off the island during the brief periods of calm. She had a feeling that a lot of her classmates were already dead. Maybe what she took for backpacks were actually bodies. There were 5 manual typewriters in Robert's room, a Royal, 2 Smith Coronas, and 2 Remingtons. Lacey tested each. She liked the Royal the best, the way the smooth black discs of the keys felt under her fingers, the smell of the ink, but she suspected it had been Robert's favorite too, because the ribbon seemed awfully worn. She rooted through drawers, found a replacement, and carried her haul back to her own room. She was on the 3rd floor, and Bartok Hall was on a hill. This area hadn't flooded yet. Her room had a good view of the harbor and of the storms when anything was visible. She was less vulnerable to water here, but more exposed to wind. She'd taped her windows, but 2 had already broken. She'd moved everything away from that side of the small room, taking over Shelley's side. She could take whatever room she wanted now. She wasn't sure why she stayed in this one. She foraged in other people's rooms for cardboard to put over the windows. Sometimes she found a bit of food, ramen or cookies or trail mix. She knew there were birds and other creatures still alive outside, but her bio professor had said that many of them were diseased, unsafe to eat or approach. Lacey didn't have the skills or the stomach to hunt and cook them, and there seemed little point. It had been hard to calculate how much to eat each day. What she had wouldn't last long, and she wouldn't last long past that, but she wanted to finish her paper. Water wasn't a problem. She'd found some matches, precious, how could anyone have left them behind, and a camping pot, and boiled the water before she drank it. Books were the fuel. Once this would have sickened her, but now it didn't matter. She only burned the ones that didn't interest her, though, the stuff she respected but didn't understand, calculus, organic chemistry. Literature she brought back to her own room when she could. The room felt peaceful to her, a good place to work. She'd always liked Shelley's side better. She revised her draft in pencil and hand wrote the rest of it, and then painstakingly typed it on the Royal. With no way to correct mistakes, she had to be careful. There was limited light each day, which made everything slower, and she worked more slowly than she usually would have anyway. After she finished the paper, there would be nothing left to do. Shelley and the others would have mocked her for staying here to finish a paper, but she didn't think they were having any fun wherever they were, if they were still alive. Her parents had died in a car crash 3 years ago, and since then she'd lived with a distant, harried aunt who didn't do much but drink and watch TV. It wasn't a relationship worth braving the storms to get back to, and she hadn't made any friendships in her 4 months here that were worth that struggle either. She was happier staying in the dorm by herself with her books, finishing her paper. As far as she knew, she was the only person left on campus, maybe the only person left on the island, although she hadn't ventured very far outside. When she finished her paper, she'd put it in the mailbox outside her professor's office, although she knew he must be gone too, knew no one would ever read it. That was all right. The paper was a comparison of Richard II and King Lear, contrasting close readings of Richard's "For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground" speech and Lear's speech to Cordelia, "Come, let's away to prison, we two alone will sing like birds in the cage." The sonorous language filled Lacey's head as if the characters were here talking to her. Both of these beaten kings, Richard railing against mortality and Lear unaware that he was about to lose his only loyal daughter, vowing to find every grace he could in her company. to wear out in a walled prison packs and sects of great ones that ebb and flow by the moon. Both of them were doomed, but Lear's sufferings had brought him acceptance and humility, while Richard just felt sorry for himself. Typing up the paper took longer than she had expected because the light was so uncertain and the cardboard over the windows disintegrated and then water blew into the room again, all the way over to Shelley's side. Lacey dragged her desk and books and the typewriter into the narrow hallway and kept working by the fading light of a solar lantern she'd found. She finished the paper just as she ran out of food, although she'd been hungry for days anyway. She proofread the paper, ate the last of her stash, a Mars bar and a precious piece of beef jerky, and got ready to hike across campus to the English building. There were sure to be broken windows, even if all the doors were locked. She'd get inside somehow. Crossing campus, normally a 20-minute walk, took hours. Lacey had to bypass bodies, none of people she knew, some crushed by trees, some apparently washed here by floods. From a tree still standing, she saw someone dangling from a noose. There'd been a lot of talk of suicide, of packs, people sitting in little groups in the hallways saying, "We can't make it anyway, it's hopeless, let's just end it." She'd seen most of those people heading to the boats, but apparently some had stayed and gone through with it. The bodies smelled terrible and animals had been eating them. She hurried past those as quickly as she could, but still had to climb over fallen trees and navigate through mud and all sorts of debris. The wind was picking up again, another storm coming, or an eye in the current storm ending. No way to know now without meteorologists or the net. She hadn't been paying much attention to the weather. It was background noise, the soundtrack to the end of the world, a droning monotony. Finally, she got to the English building, one of the oldest on campus, but amazingly still standing. The massive front door was unlocked. She walked in, called out a tentative hello. There was no answer except a squeaking somewhere, mouse or rat. Lacey shuddered and headed up the stairs, wading through mud and water. She was grateful that it was still daylight so she could see where she was going through the stairwell windows, or rather the gaps where windows had been. The second floor was better, cleaner. She stopped to catch her breath and then pushed forward, unwilling to think about what she'd do next. Finishing the paper, delivering it had been her only goal. In a minute or two, she'd put it in Professor Abelthwaite's box, and then there'd be nothing left to do. Fear and despair twisted in her stomach. You weren't supposed to put papers in open mailboxes. Other students might steal your work, or it might get lost somehow, but it wasn't like any of that mattered now. She'd reach his door and stand in front of the wooden box nailed to the wall next to it. She'd take off her backpack, put it on the ground, and reach into it for the paper. She'd put the paper in the box. She'd rehearsed all that in her head 100 times. Past it lay utter darkness, the unknown. Here was his box, and just past it was his office door, which was open, not all the way, but ajar a few inches. Lacey stood and blinked. Someone had broken in, maybe, looking for supplies the way she'd been doing. "Hello?" she called again and heard a startled movement inside. "Is someone there?" a voice called, Professor Abelthwaite's voice. Astonished, Lacey pushed the door open farther. He was sitting at his desk, his feet propped on top of it, near a half-empty bottle of whiskey and a gun. Abelthwaite had always dressed impeccably in class, tailored suits, bow ties. Now he wore ripped jeans and a faded, stained sweatshirt. They stared at each other. "I'm one of your students," Lacey said. She knew he wouldn't know her. She'd always sat in the back while he lectured. A TA had taught her discussion section, although he might not have remembered her either. "I'm in your Shakespeare class." "Your what?" Abelthwaite swung his legs down from the desk, leaned forward, and squinted at her. "Class is over. The semester's over. Everything's over. Why are you here?" "I'm handing in my final paper," Lacey said. And then when he gaped at her, "Why are you here?" He seemed taken aback, but only for a moment. I didn't have anywhere else to go. Well, neither did I. She edged into the room, moved some books off a chair, put her backpack on the floor, and sat down. I'm Lacey Wilson. Charmed, Ablethwaite said. Don't be scared of the gun. It's just there in case someone dangerous shows up. I'm not dangerous, she said. She didn't think that was why the gun was on his desk. Through the window behind him, she saw the next storm approaching, huge and dark, a mass of writhing clouds and tornadoes and lightning. I just came to hand in my paper. I didn't think you'd be here, but I knew my TA was gone, and it seemed, symbolic for me to put the paper in the professor's actual box. And you wrote the final paper? Why? I wanted to, she said, and looked down at her hands clenched in her lap. She unclenched them and bent to unzip the backpack, retrieve the paper. It was something to do. I liked the poetry. It fit, she wanted to say. She wanted to talk about how symbolically apt it was, but she knew she'd only sound stupid. He thought she was crazy as it was. Maybe he was right. She put the paper on his desk, pushed it toward him slightly. There are some handwritten corrections. I'm sorry, I didn't have whiteout or anything. Ablethwaite laughed for a moment hysterically and then shook his head. Back when students were still doing coursework instead of fleeing the apocalypse, half of them didn't write their papers anyway. They paid other people to do it for them. Lacey shrugged. What did he want her to say? I never did that. Jesus. Ablethwaite scratched his head. He looked very tired, she realized, and said, I hope you don't expect me to grade this. Of course not. I didn't even think you'd be here. He grimaced. That was a crappy thing for me to say. If you write a paper while the world's ending, the least I can do is read it. You don't have to. I just wanted to write it. I'll leave now. He shook his head again, wearily this time. And go where? No, that's silly. Stay. Want some whiskey? Are you old enough to drink? As if that matters now. I don't drink, she said, thinking of her aunt. Lacey wondered if she was dead and if she'd been drunk when she died. Maybe she'd been too drunk to realize what was happening. Do you have any food? Ablethwaite asked. Not anymore. I ate all I had left this morning. Do you have any food? Some crackers that haven't gone moldy yet. And peanut butter. Peanut butter. She felt her eyes widen and Ablethwaite laughed. Yeah, the good stuff. A colleague kept it in her office. I've been looting. Me too. Lacey looked down at her lap again. She didn't want to ask why he'd stranded himself here. He was old. Didn't he have a family or at least friends? She'd always thought life would be better when she was older, that somehow she'd find her way, find people, find a home worth having. But apparently getting older didn't guarantee any of that. A booming sounded in the distance and they both looked out the window. The storm was much closer, the few remaining trees dancing and crashing. This may be it, Ablethwaite said. Yes, it may be. He turned back to face her. All right, so what's this paper about? She'd loved writing it, but now she felt tongue-tied. It's about Richard II and Lear. It's a comparison of how they face their ends. Richard's all bitter and everything, but Lear's okay with being in a prison cell if he can be with Cordelia, which he'll never get to be. No, but he doesn't know that. Ablethwaite scowled. Mercy not to know sometimes, isn't it? No currently relevant subtext, oh no. What is it Lear tells Cordelia? So we'll live? Yes, that's what he says. Lear and Cordelia wouldn't live. No one would. Lacey wouldn't and her aunt wouldn't, and none of the departed students would, even without the storms, even without social collapse and all the catastrophes besetting every corner of the globe Lacey had heard about. Everyone would die because everyone always did. The trick was to find what good you could while you were still alive. Lear had finally learned that, and all these hundreds of years after Shakespeare had written Lear's speech, he had taught Lacey too. She swallowed and said, for just a minute, he's happy. For just a little while. It's the only time he's happy in the whole play. The sparrow flying through the mead hole, warm and dry, before it has to fly back outside into rain and darkness. Ablethwaite glanced through the window again. Nothing was visible. The wind was a howling roar. Is that Shakespeare? Lacey asked. Bede. Ablethwaite sighed, reached for the bottle, and stopped. He reached for the gun instead, and Lacey's breath caught for a second, but he opened a drawer with his free hand, put the gun inside, and pulled out a box of crackers and a jar of peanut butter. I only have one knife, he said, which I'm afraid I've been licking, and no napkins. You could wash the knife, lots of water. He laughed again, opened the jar, and scooped out some peanut butter with his fingers. He pushed the jar toward Lacey, leaving peanut butter smudges on the sides. All right, I'm still not going to grade it, but we'll pretend we're at a real university, Oxford or Cambridge, one of those. Lacey Wilson, read me your paper. Thank you. And I just spilled water all over myself, fittingly enough. So yeah, chocolate. Do people have questions? Oh.
So test, great. So we are distributing cards for you to write down your questions. Going to try it that way tonight. Also, I will be receiving questions from the YouTube stream.
Okay. And I'm going to start passing these around.
Awesome.
If I can get them open.
So I'll start off.
Yeah.
Unless I missed something, did you intentionally leave it kind of vague what exactly is going on in Sparrows?
You know, basically climate change storms are killing everybody who hasn't already been killed by war, economic collapse, pandemic, blah, 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 blah. And this university is being, you know, being flooded and washed away and has been evacuated. And some people have refused to leave. So,
Okay.
oh, thank you. By all means, and help yourself to the chocolate.
Thank you. That's what I figured.
Pardon?
That's what I figured.
Yeah.
But there were a couple moments that I was trying to take your picture and I thought, oh, did I just miss like?
Yeah. I tried to spell it out enough and not too much, and I don't know if that if that came across. So we'll see.
I mean, I think any of that is implied at this point. You know, I think all readers will be familiar with this idea.
Well, yeah. And one of the really depressing questions is it even science fiction? So there's another bag.
Mhm. Looks like some questions are coming in from YouTube. Thanks everybody for filling these out. It's easier than for us to be running up and down the stairs with the mic.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, it's still it's
still waiting.
ellipsing. You know, the ellipses.
Yeah. Oh, someone's typing. Okay, I get it.
All right, actually, it looks like YouTube does not have, okay.
Okay.
Kay Andrews asks if you will teleport some chocolate to New Hampshire.
I'm sorry, YouTubers. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. If I see any of you in person, I will give you chocolate.
Great, questions are starting to come in.
Yay.
Right. If you could go back in time, what would Susan, the Clarion West instructor, want to say to Susan, the Clarion West student?
Oh, now that's a great question. I have to think about that one. Don't worry, it gets better. I'm not sure. I mean, there are a lot of things I'd like to say to Susan, the Clarion West student, some of which I'm saying, or much of which I'm saying to the Clarion West students this week. And and a lot of that I also said to your Clarion West class. So yeah. Believe in yourself, believe that your work matters, believe that you have to tell the stories that only you can tell, and that there are people out there who need to read them.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad you were my week 4 instructor.
I'm so glad I was too.
By the way, if you're an attention ham like I am, and you want Susan to know that it's your question that I'm asking, you can raise your hand.
Yeah.
Or do ASL applause or something
Yeah,
like that.
we were supposed to have an ASL interpreter, weren't we?
I plead the
It
fifth.
didn't happen. Oh, okay.
Oh, so
Oh,
there-
of course. Gotcha.
All right. So next question. I found myself trying to visualize the island. Where
Mhm.
is it? And did you deliberately not say?
I deliberately didn't say. I'm thinking the Caribbean somewhere, but it could be just about, in any body of water. So, I mean, all of which
Question.
will be beset by
Sorry.
storms. So, yeah. Next question.
Okay. Sorry. Marcus B on YouTube says, thank you, Susan. Could you please speak on your choice of using the third person close point of view? Do you favor that primarily, or are there other favorites? And thank you for sharing that devastating piece.
You're welcome. I've written in just about every point of view there is. I mean, sometimes I use alternating third, sometimes I use first from, the point of view of various characters. A couple of times I've used second. And I don't remember a long thought process going into the point of, the choice of voice for this story. I think it works best in third because we get a little bit of distance on Lacey and what she's doing, and also on Ablethwaite. Although, I mean, it's clearly from she is clearly our camera angle. So.
Yes, when she meets Ablethwaite, I noticed that we don't get anything from his perspective. It's still entirely in hers. And I
Right.
remember my Clarion West instructor say, okay, no head hopping.
Yeah. Well, and and part of it was this, it would have been too late to head hop at that point in the story. And I wanted to maintain the surprise of having her find him there. I mean, if I hadn't worried about the surprise, I might have had alternating sections from both of their points of view, which is a technique I really enjoy, but didn't seem appropriate for this.
Question from our IRL audience. What is something you took from your Clarion West experience that you think led to your future success as a writer?
Just the fact that I could crank out stories when I needed to, although I haven't been that good at meeting deadlines since then. I think I said this to the class today or yesterday. I can't remember, but I mean, one of the things that happens at Clarion West is you're in a place for 6 weeks where your job is to be a writer and only to be a writer. And so you figure out if you actually want to do that. And some people don't. I mean, some people get this, space they've always coveted. And it's like, I'm really not into this. I'm really not having a good time. And then they honorably decide that, they're not going to pursue it, or, that it's not a core part of their identity. I mean, I had already known and figured out that it was and is a core part of my identity, and sometimes I get discouraged and think, well, maybe I just shouldn't be a writer anymore. And then I'm like, well, who would I be if I weren't a writer? Like, I can't imagine that. So, yeah.
Good. New question from our in-person audience. I would like to know how this story came about. Did the leer and the bit about him being happy for a moment come first, or did the apocalypse part of the tale? Basically, the inspiration.
This is the final Shakespeare paper I wrote in college in 1979. And I was sure I had saved the paper because I got an A+ on the paper, which I was, chuffed about. And I was sure I'd saved the paper, and I hadn't saved the paper, which broke my heart. I mean, I went to all the places it would have been and couldn't find it. But it was actually a glorious experience. Like, I loved writing it, and I remember walking to the English department through this wonderful snowfall on a early Sunday morning. I usually slept late, but I hadn't that day. I got up early and finished the paper and walked through the snow and delivered it to my professor's office. This is when we still could leave papers in boxes outside offices. And, it's just a very happy thing. And I thought, well, what if someone was doing that under much grimmer circumstances? And also I've been, and opinion varies on this. Okay. So I'm not trying to convince anybody, but I think we're coming pretty quickly to the end of the human experiment, and that climate change is a big part of that. And I've been wrestling with that for a couple of years now, trying to make sense of it, trying to, how do you write about the future when you aren't sure there is one? It's been really hard, and it's stifled my writing a lot. And when I wrote this story and I gave it to my husband to read, he's my first reader. Hi, Gary. And he handed it back to me with tears in his eyes and said, "This is how you've confronted your fears about the end of the world." I'm like, yeah, exactly. So, I was taking a happy memory and combining it with this thing I'm really scared and sad about. And I've come up with sort of answers now to how I feel about what I think is happening. And a lot of it has to do with, transferring my loyalty from human life to life with a capital L, which all of us should have been doing all along anyway, or we wouldn't be in this mess, but never mind. Somebody on Facebook actually said, well, the warming of the planet, a lot of organisms already on the planet, including possibly us, won't survive that, but it will make life possible for other organisms that need warmer conditions. And that actually cheered me up more enormously. So now I'm thinking of all the happy creatures who will get to live because we messed up the planet and made way for them. And I hope I'm wrong about that. I really do. I mean, I know a lot of people are like, no, we'll survive. We'll be in small outposts. We won't have the internet anymore, but we'll make it through. And I'm just like, I really hope you're right. And I won't be around to see whatever happens, most likely. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to throw in a question.
Sure.
When you're reading for an audience, you have to tailor what you're writing. Was that the end of the story, or is there more?
No, that's the end of the story.
Okay.
That's the end of the story. And it's, and it ties in with my hospice work too, because it's very much a story about what do you do when you know your end is approaching. And what people do is they do what they've always done. People die as they've lived. And people often, they're waiting to do something, they're waiting to see something. I was telling the class, I have a patient who, was diagnosed with a terminal condition quite a few years ago. And it was like, I want to see my daughter married, and the daughter was married. And then it's like, I want to see the birth of my first grandchild, and the baby is now 9 months old. And, and so he keeps setting goals for himself and keeps making them. And that's what keeps people going. So her version of it is she's writing her Shakespeare paper.
Thank you. Susan from YouTube asks, how has your experience as a hospital chaplain influenced your writing? And I think you just answered that, but if you'd like to elaborate.
So I mean, being a hospital chaplain is slightly different than being a hospice chaplain, not least because not everybody is dying any more than usual, right? I mean, we're all dying, but not everybody in the hospital is dying, you know, within the next 6 months. My favorite place in the hospital is the ER, where most people go home. Right, you know, they're there with a broken bone, they're there with the baby has a sore throat and needs to be checked out. You know, but most people get to leave. And what draws me to that work is the stories. Because everybody's got a story, and my job as a chaplain is to listen to them and sometimes to help people sort them out and make sense of them. And, you know, and help affirm the meaning that patients find in those stories. And that's really rewarding work. And so that sort of naturally ties into writing, because it reaffirms the value of stories and the value of making them, and, you know, and the value of telling them to other people and listening to them, and all of that, and how stories create community. And it's also, you know, when the chips are down, the stories come out, and they're not always the things you'd expect. You know, I mean, I've had experiences with people who you think you know what they're going to say, and they say something completely different. I had a patient years and years and years ago who, has everyone here seen The Wizard of Oz? Okay, and you know, Margaret Hamilton's Margaret Hamilton's character, the color of her skin, that green makeup they had her in. So I had a patient whose skin was that color from organ failure. And, you know, the patient was dying and knew they were dying, and the spouse was in the room, and they were the most loving, accepting, serene people I had ever seen in the face of this. And, you know, and they had said some words about faith. So I said at the end, you know, oh, well, you know, would you like a prayer? Because I'm a chaplain and that's something we offer. And for the first time, they'd been very articulate and very together and very gracious. And the first time they kind of looked at each other and said, well, you know, we don't know, you know, you might think this is silly. I'm like, I don't think so, but try me. And it turned out they had found a baby bird that had fallen out of a nest. It was a finch, and they had picked it up and they had fed it and they had nursed it, and it had nestled on their shoulders, and then it had flown away, because that's what birds do. And they were worried sick about this bird. Right? They wanted, you know, they were really worried, was the bird okay? Like, that was the thing nagging at them. And I said, and they're like, well, you know, the bird won't know how to find food, and we fed it, and how is it going to find food? And I said, well, you know, a lot of people have finch feeders. My husband and I have a finch feeder in our yard. And they're like, you do? He said, yeah. And they said, will you look for our bird? I said, of course I will. What does it look like? And they said, it's brown. You know, they said, will you pray for our bird? I'm like, of course I'll pray for your bird. And now, you know, this was years ago. I mean, that bird is long gone, but every time I see a brown finch, you know, it's like, your people love you, you know, go in peace. And it's, you know, you can't make assumptions. And it was just, it's a very sort of, you know, sweet, moving encounter. And, you know, they were absolutely fine with the impending death. They were worried about the bird. So, and you know, as some people know here, and you know, Evan, I've recently started a new gig doing chaplaincy at an animal hospital, an animal emergency room. And because as a chaplain to human patients, my question is always, what do you love? Because what you love is what will help you heal. And people love their pets. So, you know, and you see that in a very pure form at the veterinary hospital. So, yeah.
Thank you. So there are plenty of questions left.
Great.
Yes, I'm not really keeping time. So,
Okay.
you know, if we need to transition to book buying and signing, etc.
It's
so-
7:45, so I believe we have another 45 minutes, right?
We'll take it. From our in-person audience, what is your advice for writers struggling to stay motivated?
tell me what you love, and that's what'll help you write. Where's your passion? Write about your passion. And it's something I struggle with plenty too. And I think apathy is the great enemy of art. And because we're all so burned out and traumatized with what has happened for the last 2 years, it's very easy to slide into a space of apathy. I'm compassion fatigue maybe, and one sees a lot of this in healthcare too, right? I'm not going to let it affect me anymore. I have to put up my walls, and that's the enemy of expression of art. So we all have to find ways somehow to break through that, which is hard because it's painful, and those walls have gone up for a reason. So it's not a simple answer or a simple task, but I think that is the answer.
Is there a reason why it's an academic setting in your story to comment on the impending apocalypse?
Well, I wrote my Lear and Richard II paper when I was a student, so that was an academic setting. I left an academic job in 2017. I'd been an English professor for 20 years. And I think that it was just that because I was thinking about the paper I'd written, it's no, and also because universities are places where people study some really old stuff, like Shakespeare. And I think that the position that Lacey and Ablethwaite are in, Shakespeare is, when you don't have a future, you go back to the past, right? And you look for the wisdom that has been shared from the past. And so a university is a good place to do that.
So what would you be doing at the end of the world? What will you be doing, or would you be doing at the end of the world?
Probably weaving. Not that anyone's going to need scarves, but it's a soothing creative activity that calms me and makes me happy, and I'm making something beautiful even if no one will ever wear it. That's my best guess.
Maybe some warm creatures will wear it.
Pardon?
Maybe some warm creatures will wear it.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. When the planet gets even warmer, maybe there'll be a creature who isn't warm enough who thinks, here's a woolen scarf, I can wrap it around me. That would make me happy.
So faith is central to so many of your stories and, of course, your day-to-day life.
Mhm.
What do you find most challenging when writing about faith?
The challenge of writing about faith is that so many people have been harmed by organized religion that if you even raise the topic, a lot of people will flee for reasons I completely understand. And a lot of people think chaplains proselytize. We don't. It's explicitly against our code of ethics. Our job is to meet people where they are. And I say that my job is to help people connect to their sources of hope and strength and joy, even if those aren't my sources of hope and strength and joy. But I will not, I happen to be Christian. I will not wear a cross in any chaplaincy setting because too many people are scared of it. I'm clergy. I won't wear a collar. And actually, I don't even own collars, right? I don't wear them, and I certainly wouldn't wear them in a chaplaincy setting because they scare people. So, that's a real challenge. And actually in the field, there's this huge debate about what do we call ourselves, because the word chaplain scares people, right? A lot of people think we're the death squad. So when I introduce myself in the ER, I always say, hi, I'm Susan. I'm one of the chaplains here. I visit everybody here, so don't be scared. And people immediately begin laughing, right? Because before that, they've been like, I thought I only had a sprained ankle. What aren't they telling me? Why are they sending the chaplain into my room? And in fact, in my hospital job, I had a situation where I was rounding in a waiting room, and introduce myself to someone as the chaplain, and she became hysterical and actually filed a complaint with the hospital because she was convinced that I knew something she didn't know about her lifespan. So she called in this complaint. She was so offended that a chaplain had come to see her, and my boss wound up spending 45 minutes on the phone with her saying, no, it's okay. She visits everybody. She wasn't singling you out. But that's so, what do we call ourselves? And some people say, well, we're spiritual care providers. And every time I've said that to a patient, they looked up at me and said, you're what? Right? I mean, people understand the word chaplain, even if they don't like it. So I tend to use that word and then qualify it heavily.
Although Sparrows works beautifully as a short story, the dedication to appreciating art gives the impression that the protagonist will survive and make the best of this apocalypse. Do you see her that way, even without the extra space of a longer novel?
I don't see either of them surviving, no. I think this is it for them. I mean, I think they're going to die talking about Shakespeare, and there are worse ways to go. So I could be wrong. I hope they're, may they live on, but that's not, that's not my vision for the story. I mean, I deliberately left it somewhat open-ended, but I don't see it as open-ended. I mean, I'm leaving hope for people who want to have hope, but.
This one's just a compliment. I really like the way you draw the parallel between the situation from Shakespeare to underline how to accept fate with grace. Thank you.
Thank you. One always worries that these things are too heavy-handed, and I'm glad it worked for someone. So thank you.
What do you feel is the place of our writing at the end of this human experiment?
It's a record, it's a chronicle, it's Kilroy was here, and hopefully, the hot climate creatures or future extraterrestrials or a future human civilization, please God, going through our ruins, will find this stuff and be able to decipher it and say, wow, weren't they interesting? Right? I mean, that's what we have to hope for, that we're leaving behind a record that someone at some point will appreciate and enjoy. I read an interesting article a while ago about some, astrophysicists, I think, who had posited that civilizations tend to grow up in the center of galaxies, but they don't last very long because intelligent civilizations destroy themselves. Yay, thank you. And posited that we had come along late in the life of our galaxy on sort of a far-flung arm, and so that that the other the other races weren't there anymore. And the headline was something like, well, there are probably extraterrestrials, but they're all dead. It's like, yay, excellent. I mean, I hope they aren't, and I was talking about this, I think, with a student today, like we're still hoping that, our alien overlords will come along and rescue us, or else the AIs, right? I'm betting on Skynet. So yeah.
I've been playing with the new AI generator where you give it a prompt and it gives you 9 pictures, the DALL-E. And it just has been making me think, like, if we actually have a singularity and the AIs take over, this is what we're going to get.
Yeah.
Like human is hungry, have sex with it. Error.
Yeah.
They're going to be sloppy. I don't think they're going to be some well-honed program, but
Well, it'll take them time to learn. They're young organisms. So hopefully they'll grow up.
So the remaining questions are ones that you answered briefly in other questions,
Okay.
but if you'd like to elaborate.
Sure.
Is there a comment about the ability of art and literature to sustain life within your story? Because it seems like Lacey's been kept alive by the task of writing the paper.
Yeah, she has. And I think art and literature absolutely help sustain life, because there are records that other people have been alive and have created things. and their, and their acts of creation instead of destruction, which is inherently hopeful. And beauty is food as much as bread and meat and wine and grain and all the rest of it. I mean, we need that. We're beauty seeking creatures, and we're storytelling creatures. And unfortunately in America right now, we're living in a civilization where a lot of that has gotten buried or dismissed or invalidated, but it's still true. People need to find things that are beautiful. I mean, I've had hospital patients or hospice patients, who are in very bad shape, look out the window and say, look, there's a bird, or look at the rainbow, or, I mean, people seek beauty, I think, instinctively. So yeah, it keeps us going.
This may have been answered already. I'm getting a little bit.
It's okay.
When you started the story, did you know the subject would be Shakespeare? Did you know it would be Lear specifically? And did this idea around writing your paper come first?
So I wrote the paper first in 1979, and the idea of writing a story about it came to me. And I think I had the idea of, someone in an otherwise evacuated school, like staying to write a paper. And then I thought, oh, why don't I use that paper I loved writing when I was an undergraduate, which, oh yes, how thematically apt, right? And I worried about whether it was too thematically apt. So, yeah.
Are there other resonant themes shared between the texts in her paper and the story itself that occurred to you after the story was finished?
I mean, I think this is evident within the story, right? The power of hope. That Lear has that hope that he'll be able to be with Cordelia and spend some time with her, even if they're in really confined circumstances. And that's also an act of imagination. At UNR, I used to teach a course on Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. And in that book, the villains all exhibit a lack of imagination, and so, for instance, Denethor, in his suicidal despair, when the black sails are coming up the river, they can only be soldiers from Mordor. It never occurs to him that they might be the good guys who've hijacked ships, right? And so it's that sense of, staying open to a possibility, even if it's unlikely, which is the thing I've tried to do around my own terror around, and angst and despair around what we seem to be doing to ourselves.
So are hope and imagination connected for you?
Oh, sure. I mean, and I used to tell my undergraduate writing students, there was and of course this is like the most depressing story in the world, right? But I had a stretch in my undergraduate teaching where all of the stories were writing really, all of the students were writing really depressing stories. Suddenly the sun went nova, and then they all died endings. And part of that was because they didn't know what to do. And part of it was because they thought death was really literary, right? I told the student today or yesterday, I can't remember, that in one of those classes, I actually said, okay, if you from now on, and I usually didn't give a final, but my job, I said, from now on, you might want to stop killing off characters, but because I can tell you now, your final exam will be to write a eulogy for every character you have killed and read it aloud to the class in our final exam period. And, there were remarkable resurrections and revision, and the death count fell way off. And we also got to hear some really moving eulogies that people had written. And the point of that was every life matters. No body is window dressing. It mattered to somebody. So tell us a story from the point of view of the person it mattered to. And I forget what the question was that prompted that story.
So have I, apparently.
Anybody?
The story or the essay she's writing. and the
Right, right. Oh, you asked about hope
Oh,
and
yeah,
imagination.
yeah, that was one of mine.
Right. So I used to tell the students that, happy endings are, and I asked them, so what's the problem with happy endings? And they said, well, kids' books end happily, so happy endings are childish. And I said, look, you can't, happy endings are an act of political resistance because we can't make something happen if we haven't imagined it first. We can't get happy endings if we haven't imagined them first and work towards them, so it's important to do that. So that's for me the connection between hope and imagination. And sometimes the problem is trying to imagine a happy ending, right? Which clearly I haven't done here, but have done in other work. So
Well, it sounds like from some of these questions that people really want Lacey to survive this.
sure, I want Lacey to survive this. I want Ablethwaite to survive it. I want them to, build a raft and go off and find a lost civilization that's fine and hasn't been affected by any of this stuff. Do I think that's realistic within the world of the story, or the world I think is coming? I mean, could be. I hope she makes it, but I don't quite see how. They're out of food. It probably isn't safe for them to eat the animals and stuff, even if they can find them. I don't know where they're going to go. There's already been flooding. The waters are going to rise. Maybe they build a shelter of some sort and somebody finds them in 20 years. I guess it's possible.
Final question from the audience. And if there are any burning questions that have come up in the meantime, just let me know. The loneliness in the story is so striking. Why is the main character stranded in the university, and why couldn't she go home?
Her parents are dead. Home is with an alcoholic aunt with whom she doesn't have a bond. Okay. And there are people who are absolutely that lonely and don't have homes to go to. And so books are her home, which I think is true for a lot of people and was probably true for a lot of us who became writers. Okay. I mean, so she is going home in a certain sense. And the ability to discuss Shakespeare with a professor is home for her. I mean, and we get the sense that she's shy and didn't speak up in class. I mean, he doesn't know who she is, right? So she's actually getting a gift at the end that she wouldn't have gotten if everything had gone normally. Yeah. So, and I often write about lonely characters. I mean, I've spent a lot of my life being lonely. I was, even I had friends in college, but I was still lonely. And so that yearning to have a place to go where people will sort of welcome you in is something that resonates very strongly for me and something I write about a lot.
And thank you.
You're welcome.
Any final questions for Susan Palwick? Yep, one from Eileen.
Wait for the mic, Eileen. I can't hear you.
It's a very moving story.
Thank you.
I was wondering, just from this discussion here, did she deliberately stay when everyone else left? I didn't understand that, and now I'm asking myself that question.
Did she deliberately stay?
At the college when other people were being evacuated?
Yeah,
So-
because she had nowhere to go, and
Oh,
she
okay.
didn't, and she hadn't made friends in college. She's very reclusive. And she just, I mean, one gets the sense that she's also depressed, right? I mean, she didn't see the point. And I mean, a happier ending for her would have been leaving with other people and hopefully having some kind of companionship there, but she suspects they're already dead. Because their only way out is over water and the storms are there, and that's, you know, really dangerous stuff. So, but yeah, and you hear that. I mean, you know, whenever there's a hurricane or you know, or wildfire evacuations too, there are people who stay with their homes, and very often they're older people. You know, they don't have anybody, they don't have any place to go. This is my place. You know, the flames are coming, the water's coming, but I'm staying here. Yeah, so, you know, I mean, that didn't seem, I mean, it's unusual because she's so young, but I don't think it's unrealistic.
Thank you. Lovely story.
Oh, we got one more from online. Okay. All right, final question, and then we will clap and buy books and whatnot.
And eat chocolate.
And what? And
And
eat chocolate.
chocolate.
Yes. Yes. Thanks for the chocolate, Aunt Susan.
You're welcome.
Marcus on YouTube asks, when did you know you'd found the right place to conclude your story?
I had the ending as I wrote the beginning. And that often happens with me. I know where a story starts and I know where it ends. And the question is what happens in the middle, right? So I had the vision of, you know, as the storm approached, the professor saying, read me your paper, you know, that's the final thing they're doing before the windows implode and the water comes in and, you know, and you know, the rubble starts falling. You know, and it's a kind of act of bravery under the circumstances. And he's, you know, and he's a bit of a jerk, you know, as comes through in the story, but he's giving her the gift of listening to her and honoring the work that she's done. So. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Great questions. All right, so now I go somewhere and sign books. Is that it? Oh, woo.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Susan. University Bookstore is here. As mentioned by Books, we'll have signing and there's chocolate. So there we go. Thank you.